So my name's Llewelyn Hughes, and I'm a faculty member here at the Crawford School of Public Policy. I also direct the Japan Institute, which is one of the university-wide organizations which has the role of helping engage with Japan and also disseminate information about what's happening in Japan amongst the ANU community and amongst the Australian community more broadly. As part of the Japan update, we do this every year. We've been hoping to run a session on Japan's energy transition for quite some time. And that's really motivated, I guess, by a couple of different things. Firstly, the tremendous importance of energy-related commodities in the Australia-Japanese economic relationship. Japan, as many of you know, and usually most Japanese officials when they're talking about energy policy start with a slide on this, has relatively few energy-related resources within its land or sea. And that means it's heavily reliant, or it has traditionally been heavily reliant on imports in order to meet the energy needs, which are providing inputs into the economy. Australia has been had tremendous complementarities with Japan's need in that sense. One of the key strategy that the Japanese government has really adopted, especially beginning with the first oil shock in 1973 and 1974, is both fuel and geographic diversification, shifting out of oil in the power sector, for example, and also helping to build a new industry through innovation in liquefied natural gas, and also, of course, nuclear power was a big part of that program in the 1980s as well. In terms of both fuel and geographic diversification, Australia has been a very important partner to Japan. As a result of our location, we're not in the Middle East, and so we can diversify maritime sea routes in a way that leads to geographic diversification, enhancing Japan's energy security. And also, we have a variety of different energy-related commodities in Australia in abundance. Obviously, gas has been a really big part of that, and Australia and Japan were partners in building the LNG industry in the Asia-Pacific and now indeed globally. The second reason that we've been wanting to have a session on energy transition is because there's an enormous amount going on, obviously in Australia, but also within Japan itself. I like to think of these markets as being increasingly policy-driven. That is, it's not only the price signal that we're thinking about, it's the public policies which are being introduced which are determining the size and pricing within particular markets, and also, as we'll hear today, in carbon markets as well. So it's an extremely active policy environment within today. A lot of green industry policies, particularly focused on the use of subsidies in order to build new industries, and active consideration of carbon pricing, as we'll hear about from one of our speakers. And Japan has also been actively building new markets in the power sector, as we're also going to hear about, as a function of liberalisation and the increasing role of the wholesale market in matching generators and consumers of electricity. Now, one last point before I introduce our speakers. I think in the early wave, when people started to think about kind of decarbonisation and what it meant for things like energy security, that there was kind of this idea that because we're going to see a lot of electrification, that is, where we used to be providing heat or transport through oil using liquid or gaseous fuels, increasingly we're seeing EVs or we're seeing heat pumps provide those kinds of services. That means lots more electricity. And if you're using decarbonised electricity, that's coming from the sun or from the wind. And what that means is it's produced domestically, if you like, right? You just take the sun that's hitting your geography and you turn it into electricity, right? And so I think the general idea for some time was that you were going to see a reduction in interdependence within the energy space between economies, right? People are going to generate more themselves there's going to be a lot more self-sufficiency, and that would provide dividends in terms of energy security, which has been a key concern of Japan for decades. But I think now, as we think about the Australia-Japan relationship in the energy sector, it's pretty clear that interdependence, as it has been in the past, is going to really continue to be a very important part of the Australia-Japan relationship. And here I'm thinking obviously about critical minerals, which are used in the energy transition. Rare earth elements, although volumes are small, are very important in permanent magnets used in wind turbines, for example. I'm also thinking about potential new markets like hydrogen and ammonia, which you'll hear about, and also in manufactured products, because as has been mentioned more than once, everyone's back in the industry policy game. In fact, apparently we're about to start producing solar modules in Australia, and we'll see how that goes. Now, in order to help us kind of walk through this unpacking the energy transition in Japan, and also what that means for Australia, we have got a stellar lineup of panelists and speakers to speak with you today. In fact, I was kind of trying to think of a metaphor or an analogy for this, and I sort of feel like it's that time when you open your Christmas presents to find that you got everything that you wanted. So, so they're really going to walk us through, I think, the energy transition in Japan, and what might be coming down the road in terms of carbon pricing and carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and then also what that means for Australia. We will then have a panel discussion. I really liked the first panel in which the speakers were able to ask each other questions, so we're going to innovate ourselves and do a little bit of that, and then we'll open it to the floor for questions from all of you. Now we'll begin with the keynote speaker, Professor Yukari Takamura. So Professor Takamura is a professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo. You know, often when you think about people doing policy making, we use this phrase, you know, they're at the coalface of policy making, which seems like this kind of terrible analogy when you're talking about energy transition. I haven't come up with a better one, but Yukari is really involved, I would say, at the center of the discussions which are occurring in Japan today, particularly around the revision of what's called their basic energy strategy. So under a 2001 law called the Basic Law on Energy, the Japanese cabinet is required to review the midterm policy settings every 3 years. It doesn't have to change them, but it has to review them. And that discussion is happening right now, and we expect that new set of policies to come out sometime later in this year. Next, we're going to hear from Rowan von Spreckelsen. Sorry, I speak some German, so I always end up doing it in a German accent. Who co-leads the Japan office of Aurora. I've known of Aurora for some time. Aurora is really a terrific company and a new kind of entity which has entered into the Japanese market to help provide advice and also modeling capabilities to companies which are investing in fixed assets within Japan. So for example, if you want to build a utility scale battery facility within Japan today, which many companies are doing, what does your revenue look like? And how is that being affected both by the structure of the electricity market, the grid, right? But also, very importantly, regulations and policy, because they determine what curtailment looks like for renewable energy resources, for example. So it's fantastic to have the opportunity to hear from Rowan today. Third, we'll hear from Professor Toshi Arimura, who is a professor at Waseda University. So we have good balance between Waseda and University of Tokyo on this panel. I feel like we need some Keio and Kyoto in here somewhere, but anyway. Toshi is going to be calling us in from Paris. We tried our best, but it was hard to drag him away from Paris to come to Canberra for a couple of days. And Toshi is one of Japan's foremost experts on carbon pricing. Now, for those of you who have followed Japan energy for a while, you may be surprised to know that Japan has got plans in place to put a compulsory carbon price and emissions trading system in place in the next small number of years, right? Now, I was extremely surprised by that. Only a few years ago, you never would have imagined that was possible because of the opposition of many within industry to that kind of thing. Toshi has also just written a book about carbon pricing in Japan, which is open access. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing the state of the debate around carbon pricing and carbon border adjustment mechanisms. And then fourth, but by no means least, we're going to hear from Melanie Brock, who has a number of hats. In the energy sector, she works as a non-executive director at Kawasaki Heavy Industries, which is quite heavily invested in Australia in transition-related commodities. And is also the CEO of Melanie Brock Advisory. So Melanie, again, is I think at the coal face. I've got to come up with a different, metaphor for that. Yeah, the hydrogen face, the ammonia face, I don't know. Of kind of helping Australia and Japanese business and industry to negotiate with one another, to interact with one another, and trying to unlock new opportunities between our two countries. So that's our lineup for today. You can tell I'm a bit excited about this. I really think, it's a great group of people to help us understand where we are and where we're going. So let me pass things to Yukari. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the wonderful opening remarks. I frankly say that I have little to add. Already Llewelyn talked, comprehensively the main point of the discussion of the energy or situation of energy transition in Japan. But to begin with, I like to, it's a great honor to be here, and I really thank the Australia, Japan, Research Center and New Japan Institute, especially, of course, the Llewelyn and Ippe-san and Shiro-san. And Tess, thank you very much for your support. My talk is after having listened to the two previous sessions, I recognize that these three topics, that means economy and foreign relation or foreign policy and energy, is very much interlinked. So after having listened to these two sessions, I think I tried to show this interlinkage, and I'm now getting after these sessions, which were really vividly active and make the flow is, with the smile and the laugh. And I couldn't do that, but I tried to best to interlink, show the interlinkage between three topics. So my topic first part is I try to say that why energy transition is so important now for Japan. And then I show briefly the current status of the Japanese energy transition and its policy. And lastly, not least, but policy and challenges for energy transition that we wish to achieve. So first, why energy transition is so important for Japan? Of course, it is for climate. As you know, that Japan has a long-term goal to achieve the net zero by 2050. And also, in align with this long-term goal, we have a 2030 climate target, NDC, 46 to 50% reduction below 2030 level. So we have quite a specific target also in the current strategic energy plan and the national plan of climate action, such as the share of renewable in the power sector out of the total power generated, actually the 36 to 38%. Currently, our share is 21.7% in 2023. So also electrification of transport, we have a target of all new light-duty cars should be electrified by 2035. Oh, I'm sorry, I get a mistake. Also, as you know, that this 2021, the international society agreed to pursue effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degree. It is often called the 1.5 degree goal. So it's already repeatedly endorsed by the COPs and the G7 summit and G20. Second reason is that since couple of years, and especially now, the strong voice are coming from the demand side, the user of the energy, not supply side. Here I cite a couple of initiatives and a group. For instance, the Japan Climate Initiative called JCI. It is composed of the more than 800 company and entity, out of which the 567 company affiliated with this initiative, starting with Hitachi and Sony and other big global material companies based, which the headquarters of which are located in Japan. And also JCLP and Japan Climate Leaders Partnership. Actually, JCLP proposed to the triple the share of renewable by 2035, and also the target should be, next target recommended as a 2035 target, will be the more than 70% reduction below 2013 level. So there is a background of which, because there is an increase in economic growth due to the climate change, at least partially contributed by climate change. For instance, in 2019, we had the typhoon Hagibis. It actually caused the 4 billion damage. Actually, the insurance company paid 10 billion damage for this typhoon, but 40% caused by the rainfall due to the climate change. That is according to the British research group. They published the International Journal of the Climate Change. So, of course, such kind of damage could be accelerated, or expanded, especially the projected change in extreme event are larger in frequency and they intensify. That is come from the IPCC. So to keep our mission aligned with the 1.5 goal agreed at international society, our emission reduction should be quite steep and speedy, or with more acceleration. So around 2050, as the Japanese long-term goal, on the basis of the CO2, the emissions should be almost net zero by 2050. That's actually lead to a drastic change of all sectors of society and economy. You can see, for instance, by 2035, advanced economy should achieve net zero emission and power sector. Actually, that comes from the recent analysis by the International Energy Agency. It is a net zero by 2050 scenario, mainly in the energy sector. And also you can see that by 2050, nearly 90% of electricity from renewables. On your right side, you can see that not only energy supply, but also the building sector and transport. And also I didn't circle in red, but the capacity of electrolyzer should be, the triple and 4 times and 10 times. It's much larger than current status. So the reason why that the company now quite vocal to enhance the emission reduction or climate action and energy transition is that if I could show the Japanese situation, the most of large company and of listed company in the capital market now commit themselves to net zero by 2050, whatever the Japanese government policy is. So the one reason is the pressure comes from the financial institution. As you know, they often call the ESG investing or sustainable finance. And financial institutions wish to look at the information provided by the company about what kind of profile of emission, not only direct emission from the company's operation, but also the emission from the value chain, so which is often called Scope 3 emissions. So you can imagine that if the company wish to, identify emissions of supply chain, value chain, and reduce and bring their emission, including Scope 3 emission toward the net zero, they try to convince or they try to inform their supplier to identify emission and reduce emission, and then which bring the emission to the net zero. So that started actually the big global company like Microsoft. Microsoft, since 2021, start to implement the new procurement processes to they incentivize their supplier to reduce their Scope 1, 2, and 3. I said that Scope 3 is emission from the all over value chain. Apple have a carbon neutrality target by 2030, and they ask their supplier to commit themselves to 100% renewable energy supply for the Apple production process. So actually, since by the October 2023, the 35 Japanese companies committed themselves, including the Sony Group and the Murata and others. So you can imagine that that is the reason why that the Japanese companies are quite keen in enhancing the emission reduction and also the introduction of renewable. That's a little bit older data, but it's come from the Bloomberg in 2020. This is emission intensity of electricity of these 7 countries, of G7. They warn that business risk in case that they have a difficulty in procuring the renewable energy. First is the United States, and the second, unluckily, Japan and China and Taiwan. So that's come from the Financial Times in 2022, and the Sony warns it could move factory over Japanese energy policy in case they couldn't procure renewable enough, they have to move out. So such kind of thing then they are happening, and since a couple of years. So the last not least, of course, the reason why that energy transition is so important, I'm sorry to provoke. Oh, yes. So it is called the GX policy is now in place, and the Japanese government wish to promote this policy. I think already the Professor Ohashi referred to this policy. I think then I briefly introduced. I'm sorry for that. It's going back to, yeah. So of course, climate policy and is to protect climate system. But now the many countries adopt the industrial policies to drive economic growth and development through the climate and the green policy. So here in Japan, it's called GX, Green Transformation. I'm a lawyer, so that I put many text in the slide, but it's quite understandable. It's a basic policy for the realization of GX. It is approved by the cabinet February 2023. Of course, GX transform our industrial social structure centering around the fossil fuel energies, and 2, based on clean energy transition. Accelerate GX will lead to the stable supply of energy and energy security, but not only for that, but also providing opportunity for putting Japan on track for the dramatic bounce back to economic growth. So you can see there's some link with the energy and economic linkage here. And of course, to achieve the net zero long-term goal, climate long-term goal, but creating new demand and market and decarbonizing business or in the world, and enforce Japan's industrial competitiveness. So you can see in, the GX policy somehow embody energy policy and climate policy, of course, and industrial policy as well. So it's really the interesting phenomenon. From my point of view, it's kind of policy integration happening, but how? So the GX policy is, in my sense, there are two pillars. One is focusing on energy that I'm talking now later, renewable and nuclear and others, and hydrogen, ammonia and others. And the second pillar is some kind of supporting, especially finance mechanism or financing instrument to raise the investment for such kind of GX, changing the industrial or economic structure, need upfront investment so that the government provide 20 trillion yen in 10 years from now. And already they issued the national bond, green bond, and then they procured the finance. And to make payment or pay back this bond, they introduced, the government introduced the carbon pricing, and then the emission trading scheme finally from the fiscal year of 2026, and the auctioning start from the fiscal year of 2033. And in addition to the emission trading and the carbon surcharge for fossil fuel should be established from the fiscal year of 2028. I'm quite sure that now the Arimura sensei and Toshi is going to talk about the emission trading, so that actually the Arimura sensei and Ohashi sensei and me as a member of this committee to elaborate this carbon price and emission trading. So then I think I leave this task to the Arimura sensei. And the upfront investment and expected to allocate quite a variety of sector and manufacturing, starting with the steel and chemicals, and transportation, automobile, battery, and the SAF aircraft in the airline, sustainability aviation fuels, and also ships. And also you can see in the energy sector, hydrogen, its derivative is first one to be focused, and also next generation of advanced renewable energy such as the perovskite, is a new generation of solar. That will be also the one. So as the Llewelyn said that this year and the year to come is quite important because we have started the review process of strategic energy plan and also climate action plan, which in a sense to provide or elaborate the next nationally determined contribution. That means that the Japanese national emission target, hopefully 2033, because it is recommended from the international society. And this, quite an important then process because also, I forget one thing. And the third point that our Prime Minister currently, our Prime Minister, if I may, after the session 2, instructed to complete this work to finalize the energy plan and action plan, and also the finalizing the GX 2040 vision, not the 2035, 2040 vision together with. So you can imagine that once it's decided, of course, we have a revision, possibly, but I think this process is quite critical in the sense that will frame decarbonization or energy policy and industrial policy for 1 or 2 decades to come. So I think we are quite a critical moment, at least for Japanese citizens, and it's quite important timing. The current situation of the energy, Japanese emission, luckily we succeeded in reducing our greenhouse gas emission gradually. And if we can keep up the speed and scale, we could reach around a 40% reduction by 2030. But our target is 46 to 50. Definitely we need additional measure and action to reduce emissions. During the deliberation of Strategic Energy Plan and the Climate Action Plan, the government and also the member of the committee, and of course the public as well, Japanese public, again recognize how much low our energy efficiency, energy self-sufficiency rate. That's compared the 4 other G7 countries. You can see that our energy sufficiency rate is quite low. Also, in terms of trade balance, I think it's somehow relevant to the first panel. A couple of years, at least since several, and especially the couple of years, Japan gained from the export of automobile and the electric equipment especially, but we pay all gain for imported fossil fuels. So that's actually accelerated by the depreciation of Japanese yen, of course, but still, we consider it's problematic in terms of macroeconomic and trade balance situation. So that is the current energy mix, especially in the power sector here. Renewable, as I said, at 21.7%. Mainly, if I may, the solar, very little for instance, wind. That is one of the challenge for us. You can imagine that without sunlight, our energy supply is quite unstable. So still we have quite ambitious target. Then by 2030, as you said, that 36 to 38% out of total power generated, and the solar should be 14 to 15%, and the wind 5%. Look at the hydrogen ammonia. You can see by now there is no contribution to the power generation, but this current energy strategic energy plan wish to have 1% of power generation from the hydrogen ammonia through the co-firing of hydrogen and its derivative. That is a trend, a historical trend in power mix. I think it's quite interesting, and renewable is increased after the Fukushima accident. And nuclear around the 6 to 7% out of power generation since several years. And as coal, you can see that since more than 10 years, actually this after the Fukushima accident, it's account for the more than 30% of power generation from the coal. So that's quite the big share. And gas, you can see the more the renewable introduced, the gas generation decline. It's a little, I think interesting trend of our power mix. So what's the then challenge of on the side of policies? I think as already I shown you, that our climate goal and target looks ambitious. Of course, there are some critics, but still, it's quite ambitious in my sense. But introduction and implementation of policy are not much with the speed and scale necessary. So that should be then accelerated. Especially, I think I'm going to talk about the decarbonization of the energy sector as a key. And as I say, that the company or demand side also keen to enhance decarbonization of energy sector. I say especially the power sector. So how we could do, what we are considering in the committee and other experts, even outside. Further expansion of renewable is necessary, but the problem is we could succeed in expanding drastically since the introduction of feed-in tariff scheme in 2012 after the Fukushima accident. But now we see a slowdown in terms of speed and scale. We succeeded in lowering the cost of generation, especially in terms of solar, but not really successful with onshore wind. But you can see even solar, we have 5 gigawatt introduction since 7-8 years. But the capacity certified under the feed-in tariff and the feed-in premium scheme is getting less and less. Of course, we see some solar capacity introduced outside of feed-in tariff and the feed-in premium scheme, but still quite small and 0.5 gigawatt only. So that we can expect that if we do not introduce additional policy and measures, I think we cannot expand the renewable further. So also the problem is that maybe the energy, not only the scheme of the supporting scheme, such as feed-in tariff scheme, but also the grid system. For instance, the priority access to grid is insufficient in case of Japan, in my sense. Some limited priority access, as vis-a-vis fossil fuel plants and priority given to nuclear. Nuclear have no, they enjoy plenty of priority access in Japan. And increasing curtailment now happening, so that's reduce the profitability of the renewable project. And another quite a serious issue is the social acceptance issue, because we hadn't zoning and the land planning when we introduced the feed-in tariff scheme. So that's what's happening here at the local population object to new expansion and introduction of renewable. So I think already the government took quite a number of measures, but still they are quite a tough barrier to expand the renewable. But now what we are considering as a main focus area is that for solar, building integrated PV such as net zero energy house and building, and the solar sharing in farmland, and advanced solar PV. I think advanced solar PV, I'll come back. And in terms of wind, as you know, that offshore wind is it's a kind of most promising area. We could get we prepare the 10 gigawatt by 2030 and possibly more by 2040. And also we prepared a new bill to expand offshore wind beyond territorial sea up to the exclusive economic zone. It is before the diet. I think it depends on the next, maybe the government, how to deal with this new bill. It's very much touched on the second session. So I think, yeah. This acceleration of offshore wind, if I could add one thing here, I say that the now current goal is 10 gigawatt introduction by 2030 and 30 to 45 gigawatt by 2040. So one thing that I could add is that the potential concentrate on the Japan Sea side of the Hokkaido and Tohoku north area and the south area of the Kyushu region. So government now, since the grid, is not really ready for the large, the transmission to the demand center like Osaka and Tokyo, so that the government is now considering to relocate the demand to this area with the rich potential of renewable. Oh, I'm sorry. So I say that delayed decarbonization energy sector is key. From the another perspective, we have no clear plan and the signal in terms of the how can I say, the unabated coal and unabated fossil fuel or thermal power plant. In terms of the coal, inefficient coal, we have a voluntary plan made by the company generator, big generator, and the fade down inefficient coal-fired plant by 2030. That leads to the, the 90%, the share of the coal-fired generation from around 30% to 90% by 2030. But there is no plan beyond the 2030, and no plan toward decarbonizing power sector. In my sense, we definitely need clear plan and pathway and a signal. Without that, since the replacement, the coal-fired plant or thermal power plant to the cleaner energy, cleaner power, that takes quite a long term, the preparation and the construction, and also the investment takes time. Then it provide and enhance the predictability of investment is a key. In that sense, for that reason, I think a clear plan and pathway and signal from the government is very much important. So hydrogen co-firing, ammonia co-firing is one of the options that is considered. The challenge is cost, and in addition to the energy loss, energy penalty, and the timeline. When they are available enough to co-firing of the hydrogen ammonia, its derivative. Legislation is now passed last May to promote hydrogen. So it introduced two schemes of the support. Especially, I briefly talk about later, but I'm quite sure that the Rowan has taken up this role after my speech. So I skip carbon pricing because the Arimura sensei talk about, but as I say that the difference in the cost between the gas and the coal, that makes the situation in which the more renewable expand, the more gas-fired power generation decline. So that I think carbon pricing could play a role to change such situation and provide a more clear signal, as I said, for the investment and decarbonization. So maybe you have some, the interest in nuclear policy. Maybe you can ask. I skip here. But heat and transport fuel, it is actually the 60% of our primary energy consumption come from this area. Often they are sector, the hard to abate sector. So we do the policy on enhancing energy efficiency, on enhancing electrification, but also we need alternatives such as new fuel. I think it's somehow involved in the hydrogen, its derivative. I just briefly talk about the subsidy scheme we just passed by Diet last May. We have introduced one scheme as CFD, the contract for differences. Here, provide the support for the price gap between the sourcing of low-carbon hydrogen and its derivative, and compared to the conventional fuels, conventionally produced hydrogen. So it is open to supplier, domestic of supplier, but also the importer, so that we don't care where this low-carbon hydrogen produced. I think now the Japanese company and also Australian business have a keen interest. Somehow that could lead to a collaboration because in case of Japan, renewable volume and the cost of renewable has still challenges to produce the hydrogen domestically, so that maybe producing the green hydrogen in Australia and export to Japan, that will be also under the scheme of this CFD. So eligibility criteria, I put a slide here. As I said, that compared to the fossil fuel produced, I can say, the hydrogen and its derivative, 70% of CO2 emission reduction required to be eligible as a low carbon fuel hydrogen. So the second subsidy scheme is providing subsidy for the development of specific industrial areas called the cluster support scheme.
So, at the national level, we don't have emission trading schemes, but at the local level, we have a carbon pricing or emission trading scheme in Tokyo and neighboring state, Saitama. And I have published a book with Professor Matsumoto called Carbon Pricing in Japan. It's open access. It explains about this regional ETS. So in this scheme, so Tokyo started emission trading scheme in 2010, and neighboring province Saitama followed in 2011. One uniqueness of Tokyo ETS, it covers office buildings, so service sectors. We don't have a big energy-intensive plants in Tokyo, but we have more office buildings or like universities. And it has succeeded in the emission reduction, as you can see in the slides. 32% reduction by 2022 in Tokyo ETS. But we had money game criticism toward ETS, so the financial sector is not involved in these schemes. All the tradings are happening bilateral. So you don't see the price of emission reduction credits in the schemes. So it is succeeded in the emission reduction, but it was not successful in revealing the carbon pricing, or it was not helping the lots of tradings of credits in the schemes. So we do not have the emission trading schemes at the national level, but when we were faced right before we had the Fukushima accident, the government introduced carbon tax at a small rate. So it's called tax for climate change mitigation. It's like a 289 yen. So it's like less than 3 Australian dollars. The amount is small, but the revenue is used to promote energy efficiency, renewable, and so innovations. So this graph shows how the revenue of oil and petroleum tax and carbon tax has been changing over years. So this carbon tax since 2012 is being collected as a part of oil and petroleum tax, which was introduced to address the issue of energy securities. And as you can see that actually the revenue is peaking out, has already peaked out since 2019. And also you can see the size of the revenue is like each year the government has like a 253 billion yen, so which is like maybe 1% of the amount of the revenue the Japanese government needs to support GX strategies under GX schemes. So that's why the government needs more new schemes to support GX strategies. Yes, and so in addition to the book I mentioned, I have actually published a new book this year. It's called Introduction to Environmental Economics and Policy in Japan. This is an open access book. And in this book, I am actually explaining about new GX policies. So you can read about the Japanese new development of carbon pricing after the carbon neutral announcement under green transformation. So it's open access. And in this book, I am also discussing the importance of effective carbon rate. Actually, we do have a lot of energy tax. So when you look at the tax charged on the different type of fuel, actually, and when we compare from the tax per ton of CO2 emissions, there are so much variations in the tax rate. So actually, we can reform this, and we can improve the economic efficiency, and also we can reduce carbon emissions. So now moving to the carbon neutral strategy under the GX. So when the government announced carbon neutrality, they started to show these slides. So basically, by 2050, we will reduce emission to the net zero. But it's not that we can reduce all the emissions. We will still have some emissions from energy-intensive sectors. And that means that we will rely on sink and removable, and there'll be trading between the energy-intensive sectors and some sink and removable, so which requires the energy emission trading schemes in the long term. And after the announcement, the METI started this initiative called GX League, Green Transformation League. So the METI invited companies with ambitious greenhouse emission target, and they can participate in this GX League, and they can discuss the carbon neutral policies for their companies, and for also, participate in rule making for carbon neutral products. And at the same time, they are supposed to pledge their emission reduction goals, and there will be emission reductions. And to support these activities, the government created carbon credit markets. And so this carbon credit market is supposed to help this emission reduction target for the participating firms in the GX League. And METI helps Tokyo Stock Exchange to create this market. And they had a trial in 2022, and they started the real market in October 2023. And so far, they are only trading the J credit. J credit is a Japanese domestic offset schemes, which has energy efficiency credit and renewable energy credit and the forest conservation credit. And the price of energy efficiency credit was like 16 Australian dollars, and the renewable energy credit was like 30 Australian dollars. But the forest conservation credit was like 80 dollars in Australian dollars. So different prices. And the Japanese GX ETS started in 2024, but they had 23, but they have not started the trading yet. And I think they will start the trading of their emission reduction credits in coming months, maybe next month. And I think the Professor Ohashi and Takamura already explained this, but this carbon pricing is actually led by the first move of the Japanese climate transition bond. So this is supposed to help the transition and innovation of Japanese corporations. And I'm sorry, should be 20 trillion yen in 10 years. This is the funding from the government to the private sector. And to pay back these schemes, the government is starting carbon pricing. And the government is implementing two types of carbon pricing. So the first one, as I mentioned in the previous slide, GX ETS. And phase one of GX ETS already started in 2023, but trading has not started yet. And 2026, they will move to the mandatory schemes. And as Professor Takamura mentioned, that the government started the committee to discuss the detailed design of this mandatory scheme actually yesterday. And Professor Ohashi was chairing the committee from Canberra, I believe, and Professor Takamura and I were joining also from the committee from remotely. And in addition to this emission trading schemes, the government is now going to implement the carbon surcharge. It's not called tax, it's carbon surcharge. And this will be added on top of the petroleum coal tax and climate change tax. So this is the timeline of GX ETS. As I mentioned, that phase one is trial scheme on a voluntary basis started in 2023 April. And I think the companies will be able to get emission reduction credits in this month, and they can trade in coming months. But the 26, this will become mandatory. So we just have started to discuss the design of ETS under the mandatory scheme. And I think the government is planning to conclude the design of this ETS in 2024. And the government also has announced that in 2033, there will be an auction of allowances to the electric power sectors. So we know that there will be an auction only for the power sectors, but that will start in 2023. So this figure summarizes what is happening and what will happening in the Japanese GX schemes. So idea is that the government issued the GX bonds to help private companies to do the energy transitions. But to pay back this bond, the government is starting carbon pricing, and we are now in the phase one of GX ETS, and phase two of GX ETS, which is the mandatory scheme. It is start in the fiscal year of 2026. and surcharge in 28. And we will have 30 auction towards the power sector in 33, and the government will pay back the older bond by 2050. So this is how we are going to implement carbon pricing. Yes, and carbon levy. So as I mentioned, that government is now implementing introducing a carbon levy, which is basically like a carbon tax, but this is going to be also used to pay back the GX bond. So this is a concluding slide. So I will already mentioned all of this, so I will skip. But as Llewelyn mentioned that, you couldn't imagine that Japan will have emission trading schemes at the nationwide, but we have already started, and we will make it mandatory in coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Toshi. I believe that the sun is up where you are in Paris, but nevertheless, thank you for offering us such a comprehensive summary of where the Japanese government stands on carbon pricing today and where things are likely to go in the future. What we're going to do now is move to a panel setting, and then Melanie Brock will make her remarks, and then we'll move to discussion. So Toshi, I'd ask you to stay on the line. I'm sure there will be questions. I have a couple for you myself. And we'll have you on the screen, but not giant, don't worry. We'll have you as, so you're about the same size that we are on the screen. So if I could just ask the panelists to come up, please, and take a seat. So, Melanie, over to you. Obviously, this, this all has potentially very large implications for Australia. You have been involved for many years between Australia and Japan in industry, but also with a focus partially on the energy sector. So it'd be terrific to hear your thoughts along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Llewelyn, and thank you, Shiro, for asking me, even though I don't feel particularly comfortable speaking about energy at the moment, especially in the presence of my colleague Ian Williams, who is much better versed. In fact, why don't you come down here and give my presentation? No, all right then, fine. He's looking at me now with those looks. But I'm on the board of Kawasaki Heavy Industries, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. But I would say that all of the boards that I'm on and all of the discussions that I have with Japanese companies in particular, the issue of sustainability, ESG, energy, the transition, climate change, mitigation, etc., is key in all of those businesses. Say, for example, just to tell you about something I heard, I joined the Asahi board recently, and one of the measures that the company is working on is to try and reduce the energy, or to increase the energy efficiency and to reduce the burden that the vending machine in Japan creates for the grid in many cases. And what we have created in 50,000 vending machines is in Japanese, it's shiotsu or taberu jihanki. So it's a vending machine that will chomp up CO2. Basically, what that means is that when you buy your can of beer, which will be Asahi, as I'm hoping, you will then, the machine will register. Of course, it opens up, it allows all that CO2 in, there's energy expended, but the CO2 will be captured in tiny little CCS blocks or something. I'm not really familiar with this, I'm not an engineer, but they every 2 weeks will be retrieved, and those blocks will be incorporated in concrete and or building materials in Japan, showing you a little bit about how people can use a potentially marketing approach to something in a different way. I'm on the board of Sega Sammy, and the work that's done by a lot of the game developers is also with a strong ESG focus. Some of the ESG mindful characters are more popular, apparently, with young people. So you've got to be a climate change warrior, even in the game world. Mitsubishi Estate is a major property player in Japan, and of course a lot of the presentations that were offered by people today refer to the energy efficiency required by the building sector, but over and above that, the data centre development, etc. So there's a lot of work that everybody's doing. Kawasaki Heavy Industries, as you will have seen on the slide from, I think it was your slide, talking about some of the projects. We've got a long history, 201 years in Japan, but we've also been working in Australia for some period of time, including other markets over and above that. But what I thought I would do is say what I'm not going to do today, which is I'm not an energy expert, so I'm not going to talk about energy. I'm not going to speak about energy security because I can see too many DFAT people in the room who will give me a flogging later. And I'm not going to be too controversial, even though at breakfast this morning, Ipe said to me, "Oh, go on, Melanie. Do step out of your normal controversial cat." No. But I'm not going to, even though he did say that I can sometimes be positively controversial. My energy expertise is, as I say, limited to the companies that I'm involved in, but I do have a lot to do now, and I've had a crash course in hydrogen, even though Rowan and everybody has given me a great deal of expertise that I think I could use. I have a strong focus now, being on the board, in terms of the global supply, what competitors are doing, and this is an area where I think Australia needs to be very mindful of how we play the game, and also what Japan's commitment is to providing the hydrogen sector a society. And I think you can see that through all of the presentations that have been given with the policy background. I have personally, over the years I've been involved in the Australia-Japan relationship, experienced the need for better communications, stronger engagement, more listening, less emotion potentially, and deeper commitment to mutual understanding. And I commence my remarks today with a question to everybody that, given what we've seen in the last little while in this sector and in this sort of Australia-Japan energy space, do we need to ask ourselves a question? Have we lost our way? Is it a time for a business-led reset in terms of the discussions that we're having? And do we in fact need a framework for better dialogue and discussion between Australia and Japan? And on that point, I would like people to look at Shiro and the Centre's report, Reimagine Japan, because I think that's something that you clearly stated was important. Yesterday at the Asia Summit that was convened by the AFR and the Asia Society in Melbourne, the Foreign Minister said complacency or business as usual has a cost. And I think that's something that we need to consider when we're looking at Australia-Japan and the challenges that are faced by some Japanese companies when looking to invest in Japan. So I asked a few people what they saw as being some of the challenges that are being faced, not necessarily just by Kawasaki Heavy Industries, but here are some of the things that a few businesses reminded me of. Regulatory and policy uncertainty, inconsistent energy policies, complex, lengthy approvals. Australia and other countries, of course, have high operational costs, rising labour costs, infrastructure costs. In terms of the environmental and social challenges, of course, you have a great number of environmental regulations, Indigenous land rights. In terms of market competition and access, we have a high competition. Obviously, the marketplace is quite competitive with a number of international players here. Market access issues, etc., in terms of regulation. There are some investment and trade barriers potentially in terms of investment and currency fluctuations that impact on what people do. The energy infrastructure and the supply chain issues are always discussed. In particular, some of these are related to the remote nature of our resources sector, of course, which is, as a West Australian, I just say get over that and understand, go where the market is. But in any case, sustainability and climate concerns, of course, pressure for sustainability by the marketplace and or what pressure that puts on people. Taxation, I spoke about that in a personal sense, but I think in terms of corporate taxes being high, that is something that Japanese need to consider. Royalties and resource taxes. Some of those grievances have highlighted the complexities that Japanese companies have in all markets where they work, not necessarily just Australia. But I think that in Australia's case, we work very hard to achieve the LNG and also the coal market, of course, but we might have sometimes forgotten how difficult it was for us to put those mechanisms in place, and why it's therefore important that we protect the people and the relationships that were involved. As someone said to me, capital is a coward and it always goes to where it is welcome. And so we need to be mindful of what our competitors are in fact doing. I asked a very good friend of ours, who is a leading business person, and he said, perhaps the energy relationship or government has forgotten how important the relationship can be, and that they tend to use the energy relationship as a political football, forcing Japan to seek supply elsewhere. So obviously that's something that we need to consider, and to look at the competitors and the work that they're doing. So as I said in my opening, I propose that we work together to build on the work that's already done by many people in Japan, including the Australian Embassy, to develop a bilateral policy process and a bilateral infrastructure, to use Shiro's words, to avoid surprises, to reduce costs and understanding, and for people to work together. It's difficult in a pre-election time for people to travel, but it is imperative that our relevant cabinet ministers come to Japan, the source of capital and the commitment to investment for this dialogue. The Prime Minister Kishida visited Australia in December 2022, and that was in Perth. But I think that we have not been able to have a standalone bilateral since then, even though the very hardly fought for agreement was to have a meeting in each other's countries in alternate years. And of course our former ambassador Bruce Miller was heavily involved in that discussion at the time. I think it's very important that Japan and Japanese colleagues, Japanese business, Japanese representatives of those companies and the government also come to Australia. Sometimes the people who might purport to be representatives of the government are in fact more emotional and less connected to the government, and therefore have a greater platform to air their concerns, and their discussions are sometimes more emotional and less pragmatic than perhaps some of the Japanese business people who are involved in the actual business. But I think that it's very important that we engage more. We have a proper bilateral process by which we can engage, and that hopefully that would allow for us to understand the requirements of our export markets better, and also for technology, particularly in areas like CCS and DAC, to flow to Australia to help us with our own energy transition. So I feel like I'm giving a lecture to people who are now very much looking forward to the end of this session. So I will give my the panel back the floor, and thank everybody for being here right to the very end of the day. Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. One of the interesting things about the energy transition, both in Australia and Japan, is it's substantially focused on the electricity sector, that is electrifying things that we used to use gas for, might have used oil products for, and so on. Discussions around policy changes in electricity markets tend to be really domestic discussions, as opposed to, let's say, liquid fuels that we talk about in big producer-consumer conferences and that kind of thing. So the idea that, there needs to be a kind of iterative platform to enable each side to understand those changes, I think is really well taken, because they have, those domestic changes in the power sector have really big implications for fuel demand, for gas, coal, hydrogen, ammonia, whatever else we might think about selling. So I think it's a point that's really well
and I think it also allows for a more pragmatic discussion, particularly in the case of hydrogen. The colour discussion is intense in Australia, but it's not so in other areas where there is a lower energy security factor, I would imagine.
Yes. Now, I'm really keen to take questions from the audience. What I wanted to do beforehand is ask one clarification question to Arimura-san, who's with us here on the screen, and then ask perhaps Yukari if you had any questions for other panellists here. because I really like the way we did in session one, and then we'll open things up and have a fulsome discussion. Toshi, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the introduction of the compulsory. You said that in 2026 we're going to shift from a voluntary to a compulsory carbon market. Now, what you often see in carbon markets is a relatively weak scheme initially introduced, and then that is ratcheted up over time, right? So in terms of either the number of certificates available, or in terms of the coverage of the system across the economy. And you mentioned that the power sector would become part of the trading scheme from 2033, I think you said. Could you just clarify for us, when you say in 2026 we're going to have a mandatory scheme, what is the coverage of that scheme across the economy?
Okay, thank you for the questions. I'm sorry, I think I gave you a wrong impression that actually when the ETS becomes mandatory in 26, the power sector will be also part of this ETS. And I think the coverage is more than 50% of emission reductions. So under the current voluntary scheme, it already covers more than 50% of Japanese GHGs. But I think the idea is that even when it becomes mandatory in 26, it will be free allowances based on either benchmark or grandfathering, which will be discussed now. But we know that we need some kind of revenue. The government needs some kind of revenue to pay back the GX bond. And for that revenue, I think the government will start auction by 2033. And the first target of the auction will be the power sector. So we know that the power sector will have to pay for the permits. Yeah.
Very interesting, thank you. Yukari.
Well, I have a lot of questions to each, but I think
we've got to get to these.
Yeah,
two.
I understand your position. I mean, that's moderated fully. So then, my question goes to the Rowan and the Melanie and possibly Llewelyn as well. We talk a lot about the new possibility of business, especially the hydrogen collaboration space. My question is that on the side of Australia, it is ready for the responding to the increasing expectation on the side of Japan. And also, you have some comment on assessment on the part of the new law on the Hydrogen Promotion Act. That is the question. And specifically, you, to Llewelyn, if you allow me, I just refer to the impact of Asian countries, Japan's energy transition. I think I understand that you are the member of the expert group of the APAC. Do you see any, the impact on the ASEAN or Asian country, and especially within the framework of the APAC? That is the question.
Yeah, happy to take the first pass at that one. So the question was kind of hydrogen, how ready is Australia for the kind of ramp up from Japan? From what we're seeing in both countries, the appetite to do something in Australia on the hydrogen front is very large. The key part there is kind of what I touched on. It's kind of bringing together the right consortium in the first place, and critically having that end user offtake. So I think where the conversation needs to go, and it is going already, is around who's taking it at the end, and can that entity operate easily in Australia? Can they be welcomed in more quickly to generate that faster partnership, faster understanding? And I think that's probably the main bottleneck on that side.
I also think that Australia has been engaged through groups like the Australia Hydrogen Council, through a range of different discussions in getting people to understand better what that export opportunity might look like. But I think that because of our own energy security percentage rate, the nature of the export of energy from Australia, the discussions are still fairly much in the early stages, albeit that a lot of companies are now looking to avail themselves of Hydrogen Head Start and the like, and different programs that are available. But I do think Japan could do more to explain exactly what the marketplace looks like and why it requires the level of commitment to the hydrogen export. In particular, I think if companies were were able to communicate, and also METI was to be able to describe to the exporters the nature of the changes that are already taking place in terms of technology that is hydrogen ready, I think people would understand the urgency that some Japanese companies have.
On that thing, I think there are two things to mention. The first is around the subsidy schemes which are being put in place. So as you mentioned, Japan has a mix of subsidies to help build hydrogen clusters, and is also putting in place a contract for difference to help meet the gap between hydrogen, the cost of hydrogen, landed hydrogen, and the alternative LNG, essentially, within Japan. The Australian government is also in the process of designing programs for supporting hydrogen, both subsidies for cluster development, but also production tax credits, similarly to the Biden administration in the US, which will essentially allow you to reduce your corporate tax rate by a given amount for every kilo of hydrogen produced, so long as it's produced by 2030. I think the rules are still being put in place. In the Australian scheme, at least as it's the discussion paper that stands today, you can pancake those subsidies. So you can receive subsidies to build a project, and you can receive subsidies for the hydrogen that you produce. And there doesn't seem to be any stipulation that if you're receiving those, you can't receive something from Japan. But the point is there's no integration between these schemes. They're both developed domestically. And so, you know, it's quite possible as we stand today, I think that the Japanese government would support international projects which are different projects to the projects that might get supported by the Australian government, right? And given that hydrogen ammonia is more expensive than alternative fuels today, it might be necessary for those, for those subsidies to be pancaked or in and around the same project. Of course, there are competitiveness questions because these are competitive procurement processes. But, there is an interesting coordination question kind of around that. I'm inelegantly dodging your question about ASEAN in answering that one. But let's go to the floor. So we've had a lot of different areas that we've covered. Obviously, nuclear is something that we've touched on, but not in great detail. I've got an enormous list of questions that I wrote, but you probably don't want to hear those from me. So the floor is yours for questions that you may have, and let's begin over here. If you could just introduce yourself, say your name and affiliation if you could, and one question, and keep it short, please. Thank you.
My name's Jo Haslam. I'm from TAFE New South Wales, so the technical college equivalents. We have about 500,000 students. One of the questions I have is we're talking about this uplift in Japan. What policy settings are you considering to address the work shortage? Because in Australia we need 36,000 electricians in the next 6 years. How are you guys doing it on a scale that is just massive compared to ours?
Right. So labour shortages in the transition. Do you have something to say on that, or?
I wonder whether Hayashi-san might have some ideas. Because I know you spoke about labour shortage. Talk about passing the buck. This one. Anybody? Do you want to take it? Do you want to talk about labour shortage in this area?
You're welcome. Yeah. Right. Okay, so this is really a new question for me. Labor shortage in areas, in particular, energy transition. And actually, all over the economy face labor shortage. But yes, energy transition is, of course, needs people who have expertise. That's a really big issue, and I think it's really important to respond to that issue. And one good news is, actually, there is a great hidden asset in Japan. That is women.
Yes, I knew you'd say that.
Yeah. And
I was hoping.
And the OECD test or survey of mathematics and science capability of children actually at the age of 15, and boys and girls in Japan, it's a top class in the mathematics test and science test. And actually, girls have great capability and above any other boys in any other countries. So we are so intelligent. And so great expertise to do so. So there is a great potential. And on the other hand, at the moment, there is a number of women who study mathematics or science or STEM area field is really small in Japan. So it's a great potential to enhance the girls and women empowerment in this front to respond to electricity and energy transition.
Perfect answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to add something to that?
Thank you very much. I totally agree with Hayashi's comment. But just focusing on the power and the energy transition, I think you are totally right. We are lacking of the human resources, and training and the capacity building is quite important. So that especially the government will just now already started to training the people, especially for the offshore wind. Because we have at this moment there is no, turbine maker now, not yet, no, neither. So then we created some kind of school or the course and the high school or the university to provide a training to the student specifically for the wind. So also the investment in the sustainable finance and the ESG. I think it's like somehow the personnel to know the new, the people have a capability to assess the future technology, how much that contribute to the decarbonization when they make a decision on the investment. That's actually started to train and also create build the capability. Especially, the local financial institution doing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Peter.
I want to come back to the last point that Takamura Sensei made in her presentation, which was about the strategic opportunity for Australia and Japan to coordinate in the energy transition. Which is a central interest to hear in this discussion, I think. And other people, Melanie and the other panelists, made a similar point. And bore down in what really does that mean, really? What would you do? There are two dimensions of this, it seems to me. One is the feedstock of carbon from Australia into Japan's base energy capacity, electricity generating capacity, and the exit of that over time, and whether there's a substitute role for hydrogen to play from Australia in that. And the second one really is the feed into Japan's base metal industry and the whole transformation of the blast furnace capacity in Japan's iron and steel industry into a different technology, and how that affects the relationship between Australia and Japan. Now, either of those dimensions implies a huge investment which is beyond the normal scale of investment at both ends of the trade. And that implies that there's a need for a framework that builds confidence in that. I think Rowan mentioned the confidence and importance of the confidence effect. So, you know, get down to the nitty-gritty. We all think that we need a new framework, but what kind of framework do we need that we haven't got at the moment that would facilitate the transition that must come in some way or other if it's to come between Australia and China over the next 20, 30 years or so?
Do you want to start, Melanie, and then Yukari will come to you?
Just say that out loud. I think I did. Nitty-gritty is not really my best area. I just like making big statements and then leaving. My flight's going soon, Peter. But I do think that, you know, when I was the chair of the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce, we thought it would be a great idea to set up a resources committee, an energy and resources committee. And we did. And quite often, and at the time, the energy resources companies told us that it was very difficult for them to discuss the nitty-gritty in front of each other because of the various, obviously because it's commercial, in confidence, a lot of the information. But perhaps there are, and I'm going to sound all waffly again, but perhaps when you're setting up that framework, you can in fact be more, like allow for that nitty-gritty to be discussed, given the nature of the competitors and what they're doing in Japan now, from Australia's perspective, that is. Maybe we were more complacent then, or maybe we're more complacent now, I don't know. But I think that there is a greater need now because of the greater number of competitors who are looking to secure access, I suppose. I know that doesn't answer it, but I really do have to fly now. No. Does anybody else from Shiro? Why don't? So I mean, no, but like you're talking about nitty-gritty. Nitty-gritty. Can you do nitty-gritty? Okay, thank you. There you go.
My sense would be that a lot of some of those frameworks are starting to be put in place. If you said it's kind of needed at both ends, both on the kind of supply side and the demand side. I think that the appetite is there on the supply. The framework probably more naturally sits on the demand side initially to create that pull. And I think some of that is already coming in place from government in terms of what we heard from Professor Arimura on the kind of carbon pricing, starting to send the price signal towards using fossil in the power sector. I think where there's potentially further that could be done on the government side is those. And I think increasingly it's starting to happen in bilateral senses, but it's with government and individual industry sectors to think about the decarbonising. It's the steel, it's the other bits. And I think once that framework is in place and there's targets, whether there's penalties or not, but there's clear timings that X decarbonisation needs to be achieved in each sector, that then creates a demand which will then pull. I think the supply side is waiting for that.
So a little bit in the context of energy, I think the energy transition on the part of Japan, definitely you can see that lead to a reduction or reducing demand of the coal and gas, which are actually the quite a big share is provided by the Australia. I think the Australia, for Japan, the Australia is a most reliable energy partner. I think that not change, but still this change in market and demand, how we could, cope with together, because there are new other demand, in the area of energy, the carbon energy and decarbonized energy. Maybe the same thing happened for Japan because I think in the previous morning session, someone asked that what happened with the EV, electrification of automobile, because I understand that the Japanese company actually, they export a lot to Australian market. I'm talking about automobile. So how the Australia enhance the electrification of the automobile sector, actually that affect or impact the Japanese, the automobile companies. So maybe as the most reliable trade partner, we could make some kind of strategy conversation, as the Melanie suggested. These are two countries. We could do that.
With apologies to those who own one of these in the audience, we just need a few fewer of those dual cab utes coming from Japan on our streets. Toshi, that was a question about what you think common points of discussion might be between Japan and Australia on energy transition. You're coming to us in February, March. You may not want to comment on this, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment on that if you had a thought.
Yes. So Japanese government have an international scheme of carbon credits called a joint crediting mechanism. When the Japanese company invests in the developing countries, and if they contribute to the emission reduction, we can get credits, and some credit goes to the host countries. But that is a scheme toward developing countries. But if we could develop some kind of similar scheme between Australia and Japan, maybe that will help some investment in contribute to the carbon mitigations. And that's just a thought, I know.
I'm so glad you said that, because I had that same thought a while ago. So we should talk about this when you come to Canberra.
Yes. That would be good. Do that.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to close. So we'll go to the person in the middle here.
Thanks. I'm Eli Hayes, student here, researcher at University of Sydney. This question is going to be it's going to sound like it's from about 5 years ago, but given the changes in sort of LNG spot market structure in Asia, Japan's LNG demand will decline over time, but their company's obviously heavily contracted. Where does the excess LNG go? And B, what does the role for Japanese companies investing upstream look like in the future? Obviously, they've been keystone equity and offtake partners for a very long time, but it looks like they may not be continuing in that role unless panelists have other speculations.
Who is the question to?
Not me.
I'd probably direct it either at Llewelyn or probably at Rowan. I imagine you might have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, maybe let me take the first one. I might ask you to repeat the second part. So, looking at the kind of the LNG market within APAC, you're completely right. Like, a lot of it is contracted. Some of it, a small component is spot, and often that's where we see a lot of the volatility when we do have events like a couple of years back when we saw incredibly high gas prices in Japan flowing through into electricity markets. A lot of that was driven by the spot pricing. The excess cargo, I mean, the US is a major exporter of LNG, as is kind of the Middle East and Australia to Japan. The excess cargoes typically go to other places in Asia, typically Southeast Asia. And a lot of those contracts they have the ability to be redirected. So that's typically where the excess one goes. With regards to your second part of the question, do you mind repeating the second one?
Yeah, sure. It's that given the declining demand projection, it's 20% target by 2030. What do you think the role is for Japanese firms as equity and offtake partners upstream? Because obviously they've been very important historically as those partners in early stage investment, but that's been because they've needed it.
Just to be clear, so the 20% represents the policy target for the share of gas within the electricity mix in
Correct.
2030. Yeah.
I think in response to that, that's one part of the wider APAC puzzle with regards to kind of APAC gas demand. I think we've still got a lot of coal to gas switching in places like China and elsewhere, which is probably dwarfing that aspect. So we're kind of on an APAC wide basis, we're still seeing that kind of slightly rising gas demand. So that's probably the larger component there, I'd expect.
Very good. Let's close the session, and we'll do so by thanking our speakers. And thank you, Toshi. We'll see you in February.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, see you then.
So Peter, on that last point about what's a useful platform, I think there's actually a very broad potential agenda between Australia and Japan. It could take into account, fossil fuels, as you spoke about. Green iron and steel is obviously a really important area as well. Transport, distributed energy resources and the use of batteries, for example, for providing grid stability is another area. Energy efficiency within buildings. I think there are a lot of potential opportunities. Also, we have models of this, right? Because Germany kind of implements this kind of bilateral platform around energy transition as part of its Energiewende, its foreign policy. And so there are models that we can look to about how to do that. So I think it's a conversation we'll be taking forward. You've been a tremendous audience, also those online. Thank you for coming along today. I don't know if if all of you are Japanese speakers. You may know or may not know that the word for smorgasbord in Japanese is baikingu, which actually is the Japanization of the word Viking, because you kind of eat like a Viking as you. It was always a terrific phrase for much better than smorgasbord, I thought. So I hope that you agree with me that we've had a serious Viking today across debates in the economy, in foreign policy, and in energy transition. There are a lot of common challenges that the two countries face, despite differences in geography, population size, all those kinds of things. How to grow total factor productivity is something that we read on the front pages of our newspapers every day today. How to manage competition policy within our economic growth strategies is something that we struggle with, and we've been talking about it in relation to supermarkets. But obviously Japan has quite a number of sectors which have quite high levels of market concentration, which can be a barrier to foreign direct investment and also to new innovation within Japan as well. We are both as countries back in the game of industry policy, and how do you go about designing good green industry policy? How do you make sure you can let the losers go and so that you're only left with the winners? Might be another way of thinking about the picking winners kind of question. And it's also, of course, striking in Japan's case that we're moving towards inflation. So we have inflation in common now as well. On the foreign policy front, obviously, we're sitting in the same region. We are both finding our security within Asia, not apart from Asia. And that means we commonly have to think about issues such as Taiwan contingencies as well. AUKUS or JAUKUS, as Aso Taro said, former Prime Minister, when he visited Australia last year, as a possible Japan extension of the AUKUS deal. And then in the third panel, renewables integration and how to manage a deeply decarbonized grid in terms of reliability and cost. We're both facing those issues. International supply chains around energy transition as well. So there's really a huge range, I think, of common discussions. And our colleagues from the Australian government know that, this is part of day-to-day business in their jobs, not just on the Japan desk, but also in Treasury and elsewhere, engaging with colleagues from Japan in discussing these kinds of issues. A good question that we take forward within the university and is good to think about is whether additional platforms are useful to enable that kind of thing to occur. Not necessarily ministerial meetings, but track 1.5, track 2, so that you can feed information into governments around these shared challenges and opportunities for collaboration. Today could not have happened, and I'm told there's such an army of people who enabled this to happen so seamlessly, including our international pipeline, that I can't name them all. So I'm told that I should thank Tess and team. Are your team in the room? Are they in the room? I want them for people to stand up if they're in the room. Maybe they're outside. In any case, thank you so much. Also to our AV and our IT team, who, that was the most seamless PowerPoint call I've done, so thank you so much. And of course, to all of you for sticking around for what is a long day, but I hope an enjoyable day a day which has been full of insights and hopefully opportunities to swap business cards. This is a Japan-focused meeting after all, so we still use business cards. And you can take those conversations forward in the weeks and months to come. We look forward to seeing you very much next time for the 2025 Japan update. But for now, thanks from us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.